Stop playing with them, fool.
Hi, I'm Nicola Cairncross. Welcome to my podcast. This is where we talk about entrepreneurship, digital marketing, being a digital nomad, and much, much more. I really hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, Karen Gilbert. You are an entrepreneur perfumier last time I heard, but you might have changed what you're doing since then, and you certainly did things before. So what I'd love to is to go right back to the very beginning and tell us all about you, how you got started, how you realised you were an entrepreneurial spirit, and what you did and the steps you took to get to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was saying before we went live, Nicola, it's been a very, very long time. I think we met probably back in 2008, 2009.
That late, I think? I seem to remember you coming to the hotel, but perhaps not.
Yeah, maybe it was earlier than that. No, I didn't ever come to your hotel. No,
okay.
It was in Southwark, I think. It was the Southwark Bridge.
Yes.
Hotel. And so if I go back to that point, I had a retail business at the time, and I was looking for, I don't know, I think I was looking for answers. It was going really badly at the time, and that's when I found you with the Money Gym. And that was before kind of Facebook and all of those things, I think, probably.
Let's go before we talk about that. Let's go back. Let's go to Karen, the young child.
Back to the deepest, darkest past of, yeah. Okay. Well, I started my very first business, I think in 2001. And before that, I'd had a couple of career, I suppose, stints. One in the fragrance industry, working as an evaluator for a big fragrance company called International Flavors and Fragrances. And I did that for 5 years, and I fell into that completely by accident. And I'll come back to before that in a moment. And then I did another 5-year stint. I think it was 5 years anyway, for Neal's Yard in product development. So for those of you who listening who don't know, Neal's Yard was at the time was like a pioneer in the natural and organic essential oils and skincare industry. And now it's a much bigger company. It was still a very small independent at the time. So I had, like, in my life, I suppose, 10 years worth of being employed by other people. And before that, I think it was something that I'd always really had in my mind, that I knew that I wanted to work for myself. I knew that I didn't want to, have a regular job. And I don't know whether at that time I thought it was really possible. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what kind of business I wanted to run. All I think I knew is that I wanted to be free and I wanted to be independent, and I didn't want anyone telling me what to do. And I actually found a essay that I wrote when I was probably about, I don't know how old I was. I think it was probably like 14, 15, something like that. And it was around, what do you want to do when you're, you grow up, or when you're 30 or whatever it was. It was something like that. In that, I said that I wanted to either have my own business or be a manager of some description, which I think is kind of hilarious now, because managing people is just like my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was reading that, and I think I screenshotted it a few years back when I found it. And I think at that time I still had, and I think mindset is a really massively important thing, and really understanding, done a lot of personal development work. And I think that's really, it shapes who we become, the voices of those people around us. And sometimes it takes a lot of personal development work to unpick those things. And in this particular essay, it was like, I'd really like to have my own business one day, but, I know that I need to get my exams and my qualifications first so that I've got something to fall back on, because it's really hard to run a business, and, you need a lot of capital to run a business. And I'm like, at 14, 15, like, where did those words come from? And they obviously came from teachers, grandparents, parents, things like that. And so I know that I had that real kind of like drive to do my own thing from quite a young age. But I also had this thing in my head that I need to actually have an education, really understand what it is I want to do and have the backup before I go into it. And I think that is probably why I started my first business so late, much later in life than I feel like I probably should have done. So the first one was sort of, I dipped my toe in 2000, was it 2001? So I was 31 then.
Wow.
But actually, when I left school, I did my A levels and didn't know what I wanted to do, and decided that I would just go to work and get a job, just to give myself a year out, 2 years out. And I went to work for an advertising agency in Covent Garden, which is where I think I kind of fell in love with Neil's Yard, actually. And I lasted at that job for 4 months, hated it. Hated the whole 9 to 5, which was sometimes in that industry, it was like 9 till 11 or 7 or
whatever it took. Yes.
yeah, whatever it took. And then it was actually for an ad agency that did brochures for Ford New Holland farming equipment. So really glamorous, and had to go on shoots on farms and things like that. And then there were 2 photographers there that said, well, look, if you're looking to leave, we're looking for an assistant and we work like in the same office. So, if you want to come and work for us and train to be a photographer's assistant, because I'd done photography at sixth form. And I was like, oh my God, yeah. So I was going to go and work for them. And they said, well, the only catch is that, we don't want to pay your tax and national insurance. So you need to be self-employed. So actually that was probably at the age of, I think I was about 19 then. And so, yeah, it was 1989. So officially, the first time I became self-employed was again by accident. And that was at the age of 19, where I had to do my own bookkeeping and pay my own tax and national insurance and what have you. So really that was the first time. But technically it wasn't like working for myself or running a business, because I still had to turn up at work at a certain time and leave at a certain time. But the only difference was, I had to take responsibility for my own financial stuff. Yeah. So I guess it's always been there. And then I ended up leaving there. Didn't really last very long there because it was a grim job in a grim, cold office. And I then ended up going to work for a temp agency, which was working on promotion teams in the skincare and beauty and fragrance industry. So we did launches for Harrods, Harvey Nichols, Selfridges, for a company called Shiseido, which was a Japanese skincare company that had come over and was launching in the UK. And so even though I wasn't technically working for myself or self-employed, I could actually say, no, I don't want to work today. And they said to me, because it was an agency job, they were like, okay, well, we did a 2-week stint. I'd be working 7 days a week for 2 weeks on promotion, but then I might not work for, the next week. And then we did kind of counter cover. So it would be like, okay, what's your availability this week? And I would say, okay, I was living at home. So it was actually quite fine to do that. My family were very accommodating. And I'd be like, okay, well, I can work Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever. And I would do that. So technically, even then, I was kind of working on a sort of a freelance scale. And then when I went to London College of Fashion, trained as a makeup artist. And that is when I did a work placement for IFF and fell into the fragrance industry. And I got offered a job by IFF, and then that turned into like a full-time sort of career job. And over that 5 years, I mean, I learned a lot. And, if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And I kind of learned about the industry. But I really struggled. Honestly, I struggled with that whole 9 to 5.
Oh, yeah. It felt like a prison, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I think that really kept me going with it was that they gave me quite a big degree of flexibility in my role, in that I had my own office and I managed the little lab. So I didn't work in a big kind of like group office. My boss kind of left me alone to do my job, didn't micromanage me. Also, I had to kind of schedule in sample shopping. So we had to go buy all of the samples from Tesco and Superdrug, and send them off to the creative centres. And so I could do that on my way into work in the morning if that fit my schedule. So often I would do that. And if I had like a week where I had a lot of sample shopping to do, I knew that one day, okay, I could say to my boss, look, I'm going to do that first on my way to work, and then I'll come in after that. And she was absolutely cool with that. And it just felt like it was much more flexible. And then when I left and went to Neil's Yard, I negotiated my hours so that I didn't have to. So I did 10 till 6 rather than 9 till 5, so that I could miss rush hour, because I hated doing that commute and like being squashed on the tube. And so I always negotiated with those sorts of things. And then I think with Neil's Yard, I left 3 times or 4 times. And every time I left and they asked me to come back, I renegotiated my hours. So I was actually doing less and less and less. And then I started my own business in 2003 properly. That's when I started Time Bomb, the retail business. And so at the time I was running that business, and my partner at the time was sort of doing the shop floor stuff, and I was still working for Neil's Yard. And then I gradually dropped my hours, and then I left it eventually completely and went into the business full time. And that was probably 2004. Okay. So yeah, it was dipping my toe in and out and then back in. But I think I always had that in me.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I worked for a guy called Benny Gray, who ran the space organisation, and it was Alfie's Antiques, Gray's Antiques, Canalot Production Studios, Big Peg in Birmingham, lots of creative centres with lots of people working in them. And I absolutely loved the whole creative thing. But he was brilliant because he never, as you said, he never micromanaged me. He never, if I got in 5 minutes late, it wasn't a big deal, or 10 minutes early, or even I used to work evenings sometimes if needed, and then I'd have a day off, and as long as the job got done and I kept moving forward. And he used to have this amazing system where you'd send him an email on Friday afternoon, and it was what worked, what didn't, and what's changing. And I still use that to keep myself on track now. But if bosses realised how much more they got out of entrepreneurial types, and how little we need to keep us happy in terms of not feeling like you're in a prison, or you're constrained by having to be there at a certain time, or having to travel at a certain time, and the stuff that makes entrepreneurs feel like they're in prison.
And I think that was one of the things that, with Neil's Yard is that, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I ended up working 3 days a week for Neil's Yard. That was when I'd sidestepped from product development, and I was then their retail trainer. I sort of was in the training department, and I ended up doing the same amount of work and volume. I basically was doing the same job that I was doing in 5 days a week in 3 days a week, except I was only getting 3 days pay.
Oh. Yeah,
so exactly. And so I think that, I don't know whether that's changed now in terms of with the whole work from home thing, and I don't know whether it's gone back to that. But I did find that, I still did the same amount of work. And I do think that if employers paid their staff, I don't know, like if you can do the job,
you've got to find. With Benny, it was great because the first project I did for him, it was a measurable outcome. Second project, measurable outcome. Third project was all about making money out of an empty room in Mayfair, and probably you did some perfume launches there because it was the music room above Gray's Antiques, and that's one of the things we used to do up there, was let it out for 3 days, 5 days, launches, that sort of stuff, and it was all based on how much money I made him out of that empty room. And as long as that amount kept going up and there was a good profit margin in it, he didn't care what the other details were. So I suppose that's what one's got to do with an employer is work out what the measurable outcome of your role is. And then perhaps if you're meeting that measurable outcome, it shouldn't really matter which days you're working.
No, and I do think, obviously there are some differences in different industries. I had a retail business, so obviously people needed to be, I had to have bodies on the floor, at that point in, somebody to manage the shop, man the shop. But in the business that I have now, I don't have, I mean, I've got a very small team, but they're all freelancers. They're not employees in the sense that they have to show up to work every day at a certain time. And so I chose to employ freelancers because I think managing a team of God knows how many staff we had over the years at Time Bomb, but managing a team of very young staff, and it just wasn't my skill set. Honestly, managing people is so not my skill set. And so I actually prefer entrepreneurial types who come in and do the job. And I kind of, when I had the retail business, I did try that a little bit. I had one guy who left actually because he wanted to start his own business. And I was like, do you know what? That's an amazing idea. More than happy for you to do that. If you want to work part-time for us and do that on your, do that in your own time, in your other hours. And I kind of treated a lot of my staff like they were entrepreneurs and gave them ownership of their role. But actually, some people just don't want that. And I think that was a big learning for me in business, that not everyone is entrepreneurial, and you can't foist or force entrepreneurialism on people who literally just want to rock up to work, get paid, go home and do whatever it is they want to do.
Think too much,
yeah. And so I had a couple of people who were very entrepreneurial, and I had people who I would have preferred to be a bit more entrepreneurial, who weren't. And I think that was an interesting lesson that we're a very different breed of people, entrepreneurs. I think
we're very nosy and curious, and we want to find out how everything works, and we want to know how everybody else's business works. Everyone's always groaning at me when I go on holiday, because I'm always asking people, like the taxi driver or the boat excursion chap or whatever, how their business works. So anyway, back to you. So I remember you in the retail place. It was in Croydon, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
And so that went along for a while, but then you joined the Money Gym when it wasn't going quite so well. Money Gym ran from 2000 to 2010. So around the middle to end of that, just as we're all going into a global financial crisis, but nobody realised that.
Yeah, so I realised it very...
Did you?
Yeah, I realised it when people stopped spending money. So I started the retail business in 2003, at the end of 2003, and I started that on a bit of a whim, actually. It was a bit of a conversation over a couple of beers in a bar with my now ex-partner. And, he was in the music industry, he was in bands and what have you, and had a record deal, then lost the record deal. And, we were kind of sitting there thinking, okay, well, I was working at Neil's Yard. I was working at Neil's Yard at the time, and he just wasn't really doing anything. And he had lived in Camden, and we were just like, wouldn't it be cool to open a shop like one of the shops in Camden, but in Croydon? Because there were loads of little kind of rocker kids and metalers and goth kids around with nowhere to go. And so I just thought, I'll have a look and see what's out there in terms of property, premises. And I found, this little area that was super cheap as chips rent. And I was like, okay, it's not going to take much, but I've got a job, so you'll have to be the face of it. I'll fund it. And we'll just get it up and running.
And that, I think, destination experience kind of thing.
Yeah. And so that was in the July, I think. We had the idea of the July of 2003. And then by Christmas that year, the shop was open.
Okay.
And I didn't know anything about running I thought, well, I've worked in retail my entire life, but I didn't know anything about running a retail store other than I'd worked in retail. So I kind of knew enough, but I'd never had a clothing business. So I had no idea about any of that. So it was literally learning on the job and just hustling it. And there was no Facebook. I think MySpace was just starting then as well. So there was a little bit of that, but we had no social media. It was literally printing flyers out and pounding the streets and putting posters up, putting flyers in pubs, in other shops, in bars, handing them out in the street at gigs, that kind of thing. And we ran that kind of went really, really well. And it ended up going so well, we had to move premises. So we moved to a bigger premises. And then we were in these bigger premises until about 2007. And then we got an eviction notice to say, oh, we're redeveloping this block and, you've got to move. And at that point in 2007, we'd had a lot of growth, but I'd actually funded a lot of the growth on credit cards at naught. We had our 0% credit cards, personal loans, that kind of thing. And so I'd got to that point in 2007 where the business had a debt of quite a chunk. And I'm not quite sure how much it was in 2007. But by the time I found the money gym, it was about 85,000. And that was when
business owed you 85,000.
Yeah. And that was all on my personal credit cards.
Oh, ouch.
I know. And then we had to move. So our landlord said, well, look, I had all of this debt and I had this business and we were looking to having to move. And I'm like, I can't shut this business down because if I shut the business down, how am I going to pay off the debt? Yeah. So we were forced to move to a different premise again, which was much, much bigger, too big for us, really. The rent was double. But it was on a high street location. So I had nearly had a nervous breakdown. So I had to do it. And I was just like, what do we do? What do we do? Okay, I'm just going to have to do it. And then the recession hit and all of the credit card companies put the interest, the 0% went up to 30 something percent.
Oh, no, it's horrendous. Yeah.
25, 30%. So I was paying the minimum amount every month on these credit cards, which was about 85 grand's worth of debt at 25, 30%. And the recession hit, Primark opened down the road. No one was buying any clothing. And our sales were we were losing 25 grand a year, basically. And that's when I found the money gym. And I think I'd Googled, I don't know what I'd even Googled. And it was actually through, what's his name? Andy, who, the property guy.
Andy Shaw.
Yeah. So I found, for whatever reason, I was thinking, oh, maybe I should look at something else, property investing, online business or something like that. And I think I'd Googled something to do with online business or property and I ended up buying his book. And then I think I found you and it was through something to do with online business because what we'd never managed to do is get our online shop up and running for the retail business. And so in my head, I was like, okay, we need to be leveraging our time and also getting outside of our local area, which has got a very small pool. We can't compete with some of these big online brands. So why don't we try and get our own online thing up and running? And I think that's how I found you, actually.
I think you were custom printing T-shirts and things.
Yeah. We'd started custom printing T-shirts actually because we couldn't afford to buy stock. Okay. So a lot of the design kind of led alternative clothing brands were really expensive and the kids couldn't afford them. And so they were coming in saying, oh, we want something that looks a bit like that, but we can't afford to pay 30 quid for a T-shirt. Have you got anything cheaper? And we couldn't find anything cheaper. And so what we started doing was doing custom designs, custom printing. And obviously that was it became a huge part of our business, actually. And it was one of the things that turned the business around.
Wow.
That was one of the things. And then when we had the bigger premises, it was obviously we had to employ more staff and that we couldn't really afford. And I think I was just sort of clutching at straws, trying to kind of decide what to do. And a lot of people would come into the shop and say, oh, do you do body piercing? Do you do tattoos? Because it was kind of that vibe of a shop. And I was just like, that is not my area. I don't know anything about that industry particularly. No, we don't. But we actually do sell body jewelry. So people were coming in to buy their nose rings, lip rings, whatever. And I'm just like, do you know what? We've got the space, so maybe we should turn a little bit of the space. We had this kitchen area downstairs and a big kind of warehouse area. And so what we decided to do is turn the little kitchen area into a piercing studio. And so I found out all of the ins and outs of what we needed to set it up. And then a guy who came into the shop was like, oh, I know how to do this. He was much older guy. And he gave us some advice, which turned out to be like awful. But anyway, long and short of it is we opened this body piercing studio. And initially I'd offered the spot to one of our a studio in the local area. And I said, look, do you want to come in and take this as a unit, take it not as a franchise, but I can't remember, what the name of it is. Like, take it as a concession. That's it.
Yes.
Would you like to take this as a concession? And they said no. And I'm like, okay, we've got to do it ourselves. Anyway, we did. And we employed this guy. And it was like, okay, but it was like, he was quite slow. And I'm like, how are we going to make any money doing this? And then a couple of things happened and he made a couple of mistakes. And I'm like, actually, we can't afford for anyone in this type of business to make any mistakes.
No, quite, yeah.
So we fired him and put an ad on a tattoo community forum. And this young Aussie guy who was 21 answered, came in and he was just like, I've just arrived. I've got a 2-year visa. This is what I do. This is what I've done my entire life. I've been working in studios since I was 15. And we're like, okay, you're hired. Come in. He said, I can see what's going wrong. This is how you need to do it. And he literally just stepped in the next week, took the studio over. Like he was like, I just want a salary. I don't want commission. I need a salary because I need to pay my rent. And he looked really cool. He was great with customers. And he literally just took it and ran with it. And he said, we need to open a tattoo studio with the rest of the space. And I'm like, hang on, hold your horses, like one bit at a time. And I said, you turn this into a profitable studio and then we'll see what we can do. And that year that he joined the business, we went from making a 25 grand loss to a small profit.
Wow. Okay.
Within about 3 or 4 months.
That's incredible. The right people at the right time. And
it was just honestly like Doug saved that business, really, honestly. And so that happened. And then he was like, okay, so when can we do the tattoo studio? And I was like, okay, so we're making a profit. That's all great.
Were you starting to pay yourself back a tiny bit by then or not?
No, not at all. I was taking a salary. I was taking the minimum salary for that entire time of like, I don't know, 7.5 grand a year, I think, whatever it was. So literally that's all I was taking. And I was paying my then partner a bit more than that. But between the two of us, we were on minimum wage, but it was just enough because I had a house that we lived in and my mortgage was really low. So we kind of just kept the wall from the door from that perspective. And then I was like, okay, so I've got 10 more £1,000 on my credit card. That is literally it. And I know that we're making a profit now, but I'm virtually bankrupt in terms of like, I don't know, I'm still like paying the minimum.
You've got no assets, you've got no income to speak.
Yeah. And I'm just like, I'm not losing the house. And I remember when I came to the first session at the Money Gym, I had a coaching session with Judith, and I never, ever forget this. And I always say, it was the best piece of advice that I ever ignored from Judith.
Oh, dear.
And she said, because I, cried for the entire 30 minutes saying how terrible my business was, yada, yada. And she was just like, look, nothing is worth this. And why don't you just declare yourself bankrupt, get rid of that business, do something else, etc. And I was so stubborn. And I was like, I'm not losing my house. I'm not doing this. I'm not declaring myself bankrupt. And I clung on tooth and nail. And I was just like, actually, I've got £10,000 more. If I'm going to go down for 85 grand, I'll go down. I can just as easy go down for 95. Yeah. So I've said to Doug, like, I've got 10 grand. That's it. Like, if you can pull in favors, if you can set up the rest of the downstairs basement into a tattoo studio, if you can do it for 10 grand and kit it out, then we can do it. And he was like, okay, right, I'll see what I can do. And I literally just gave him the brief and was like, that's it. And at that same time, that was probably, I think that might have been, I think that was 2010, actually. I think that might have been
It was about to
2010.
collapse. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think that was about 2010. And I'd gone away with my then partner, and I was like, I needed to take, and I think actually the money gym, really, those sessions that you used to do at the hotel, I'd started to carve out. And I think I bumped into, met Philly, um, um, at Judith's wake the other day, and she was my she was my money gym coach.
Oh.
And I realized we hadn't actually met in real life ever. And that was from back in 2009, whatever. And I'd decided when I started working with the money gym to like carve out small pockets of time for myself. And I think this is so important for anyone who's starting a business, who's in a business. And I think it was at the time, it was like those coaching sessions were like, okay, I'm going to take an afternoon a month or whatever it was. And then when you did the live things, I'm going to go to one of those and carve out that time for myself. And gradually, I carved out more and more time for myself. And I think I was away on holiday and I was just like, okay, I need to sort of decide what it is that I'm going to do. And I think it was it was a session that, because Judith set up a little the creation experiment a group circle, and I was part of that. And it was through some of those sessions that I was just like, okay, what is it I can do? And I think one of the things that we always find, if you're in a business for so long and you're in it, you don't see the wood for the trees, and you can't
definitely don't.
It's like you can't make strategic decisions when you are in the mud of it and in the weeds of it. And I think by carving out those little pockets of time to have coaching sessions, to go to events, I actually started to think a lot more clearly. And also it helped me to let go of the reins and micromanage everyone and give people a bit of responsibility.
We were very keen on the E-Myth way of doing
the
things.
E-Myth, yeah. And I read that book, like that E-Myth book was, that was, yeah. So that was where I got it from you guys. And it was like, okay. And obviously Judith ran cash flow. I think the money gym ran cash flow sessions as well. That's probably where
cash flow 101 games. Judith was very, very, I mean, we're all sort of hurting a bit because she has only been gone about a month, and she was so brilliant at working with creative people. She had, I mean, I was a creative person because I went to art college and did fashion and all that stuff, but I hadn't ever made any money at it. So I was a bit cynical about, trying to be creative. I was much more on the, do something to make money and then be creative on the side. But Judith really believed in creativity being a route to abundance, and
yeah, absolutely.
She was very good on taking care of yourself. She was very good about taking time out to strategically plan, and she was just an amazing person. She had certain, I know that you work very closely with her.
Yeah, I mean, she was a close friend from that session at the money gym where I bawled my eyes out until
She used to vet everybody coming into the money gym. She wouldn't let anyone in without her talking to her first. Whereas I would have, I would have largely taken anyone who had the right attitude and the money to pay us. But she really believed in finding out the deep depths of someone's soul and working from there. And you're, it's so amazing to hear you talking about the power of coaching, because it's completely changed my life. And so many people don't give it the respect it deserves, I don't think.
I think the reason that I place such a big value on it over the course of my life is that I think it was because of the retail business, actually. And I found myself in a position where I had a team of staff, youngish staff who were all in their late teens, early 20s. And I was in my early 30s, mid 30s. And then my partner at the time was the same age as me, and he had never run a business before. He was a bit of a hustler and a busker, and, he could wing it, but not a good manager of people or anything. And I felt such a heavy weight on my shoulders because I was the person that they all came to for problems, issues, to solve, dilemmas. And I was just like, where do people go? Like when you're at the top of this tree, like what do you do? I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm doing. Who do I go to? And I'd had sessions with various experts. You know, you go to your local chamber of commerce or whatever,
Oh,
and
God, yes.
then you get a free coaching session. And honestly, like I was just like, these people just don't have a clue about me or what it just didn't work. And when I met Judith and really started to come to the events at the Money Gym, it just opened up a whole world
Whole room
to
full
me.
of people just like you.
Yeah, and that I didn't even
Everybody
know
trying to
existed.
improve themselves.
Yeah, and that was hugely groundbreaking. And I think so by the time 2010 came around, I'd started to carve out chunks of time for myself. And because I was going to these monthly things, this creation experiment things, and having sessions there, and that was like, I remember Judith saying to me, like, enough, Karen. And it actually was it really hurt at the time because she said, look, you've been, we both know her very, very well.
Yeah.
And she said to me, I'm going to butcher her imagine this in a Judith voice. It's like, look, I'm just like, this has got to a point now where you've just got to stop complaining about this. You've either basically, and she said it in no uncertain terms, shit or get off the pot.
And she was so posh too, wasn't she? So
she was incredibly posh. And I was just, and I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And she's like, you've just been whining about this for like however many years. What was it, from 2007 to like 3 years or something? Like, just, you've got to make a change and you've got to do something about it, or you need to just stop complaining about it. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so it was actually, I think it was Bianca Tate, actually. It was Bianca.
Yes.
Yeah, who said, okay, right, take me through a little coaching thing. And it was like, okay, when was a time that you were really happy doing something in your career, in a job, whatever? Because I was like, I don't know what I can do. And she actually kind of reminded me of a time when I was running workshops when I was at Neil's Yard with kids or teenagers, making product. And I'm like, that was really fun. And she was like, okay, well, why don't you just go and do that for just, it doesn't have to be your life, but just do something that is not your business. Do something that is actually enjoyable. And I was like, okay, yeah. And that set me off on a little trajectory. And I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to write a book. I'm going to and I delved into my, the sort of depths of my brain of what I used to do. And okay, I'm going to, teach some natural beauty product making classes. I'm going to talk about perfume and aromatherapy and natural materials, and that, because that was what I was really interested in. And the timeline of this is so kind of collapsed and interwoven. I don't even know what the trajectory was, but all I know is that I went to I was in Thailand and I made a video, and this video is still up on one of my old YouTube channels. From Chiang Mai in Thailand, saying, when I get back, I'm going to start teaching workshops. And I keep it there just for my own. It's not on the channel that I use. Yeah. And so I decided to do that. And then and actually, yes, I was on Twitter. I was definitely on Twitter because my friend who was teaching sewing at the time, had a friend who was living with me at the time, I think. She was teaching sewing classes. And she said, oh, there's this organization they've set up, and, every sewing class that I put out, they kind of do a similar thing. And will you just follow them and see what they're doing, keep an eye on them? And I did. And I saw a tweet that said, oh, we're looking for an instructor for a class on teaching body product making class, like bath bombs and things like that. And I was like, oh, God, will Libby be annoyed if So I messaged them. I was like, I can do that. And it was in Islington. It was a company called the Make Lounge. Jennifer Purtle. She was just so instrumental in helping me to achieve what I've achieved now. Is that she had an interview. She was like, brilliant. Okay, can you rewrite the class so that we've got this class. Our instructor has left. Can you rewrite it so that it's in your own, in your own flow? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll pull it apart. I'll redo it so that it's something that I can authentically teach and what have you. And that was that. And they paid. I didn't get paid very much money.
Was this a real life thing? So people came to somewhere.
Yeah. It was at the time when the crafting movement had restarted again.
Yeah,
Where it was
that
like a
can't be
two.
die, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so it was called the Make Lounge, and people could rock up for a 2 hour class, have a glass of wine, have some nibbles, make a lampshade or a cushion cover,
This in
or
London. Must
yeah,
have
it
been.
was in Islington, just off
Islington,
of Upper
perfect.
Street. Yeah,
Yeah.
so lovely place. But I was living in Croydon. So by the time I'd gone from Croydon to Upper Street and paid for my travel and, done this 2 hour class, and I didn't really make any money out of it.
Yeah.
But it was literally just to get my head out
Gave you the
of,
confidence to do it. Yeah.
yeah, it was to get me into a space or a mindset or a headspace where I wasn't just thinking about the problems that I had in my day-to-day life and
Yeah.
business. I didn't really intend for it to be a business where I had I didn't say I had no intention of making money, but at that time, I didn't really think of it as this is going to be my business, because I still had the retail business and that was my business. This was my side gig. This was my little hobby, my side hustle that I didn't really think of. It wasn't sort of monetizing at the time. And I was literally just getting paid expenses. And through all of that, I decided that actually I didn't want to do another business that relied on staff. I didn't want anything heavy. And I just wanted to spend a bit of time at home for self-care and to kind of really delve back into my spirituality, my kind of meditation practice, because I was always into that kind of thing. And so I decided that maybe if I write a book, and I think actually it was probably because I'd been to some of your, I think it was like Brett McFall, Make Money While You Sleep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, some
You
of
know,
those workshops.
so weird, right? This will make you laugh. I got a message yesterday from Alexis Garneau-Miller. Do you remember her?
Oh my God, that's a
She used to
blast from
run
the
a wellness
past.
centre in
Yes.
West London.
Yeah.
She was actually putting a picture on Facebook from a Brett McFall event in Australia yesterday.
Oh my goodness.
It's
Yeah, I remember
still
being in
going.
touch with her actually.
Yeah, she's in Australia. I think she's running she became a tradie. So she went from running a wellness centre in West London to going out to Australia. And I think she's either a carpenter or a plumber, or she runs a
That's insane. And the name rang a bell and I'm like, why would I know her? And yeah,
she's
she
very
had a
glamorous
wellness
as well.
centre because it was very in alignment with what I was doing. And so I decided to write a book. And I think one of the reasons why I decided to write the book was because I wanted just some time for myself.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have an excuse to kind of sit at home and just have some time out really and do something creative. And because I was brought up in this environment of, come on, you've got to take action and you've got to work. And being in that sort of movement of doing stuff and thinking and doing stuff was what pushed you forward. I think it was Judith actually that said, actually, no, that is not where your aligned actions come from. It's actually creating that space and that stillness. And she gave me a contact for a guy called Tom Evans, who was a book coach.
I do.
And I went to, yeah. So because I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. How do I write a book? I don't know. And so she said, oh, go find, do this workshop. So I went to one of Tom Evans' workshops thinking that he was going to teach me how to write a best-selling book. And then the first thing he did was pull out some oracle cards and take us through a guided channeling meditation.
Brilliant.
And I was like, oh, you can do it like this? So this is amazing. And so by the end of 2010, I'd manifested a book deal. And so I got an email from a publisher at the end of, it was November 2010. I got an email from a publisher saying, we have seen your workshops that you teach on the Make Lounge website. And we've had a look at your blog, because I started a blog because I was like, okay, if I'm going to write, I need to, do the internet presence. And I was following all the instructions that I'd been given and all of the workshops that I'd been to at the Money Gym. And they said, oh, we've had a look at your blog and we've seen that you used to work for Neil's Yard. And we've got this title.
Credibility, Neil's Yard, isn't it?
Right, I know. We've got this title called A Green Guide to Natural Beauty. And we're looking for an author and we think that you'd be perfect. Would you write it for us?
That is so incredible.
I know. And then, of course, when I said to Judith, oh, I think I've manifested a book deal. And she said, well, of course you have. course you have. And I was like, but I don't really want to write a natural beauty book. But then I was like, okay, so because I wanted to teach perfume making workshops. And I was like, okay, so I've put it out to the universe that I want to write a book, but I wasn't really that specific. And I've got this opportunity. And I think this was a pivotal point in my business life. And the deal that they gave me was they gave me an advance and piddling royalties, but still they were going to pay me to write it. But the contract had to be signed like as soon as. So I think I signed the contract on Christmas Eve of 2010. And then they said their publishing date, in order for them to meet their publishing deadline, the book had to be the final finished book had to be sent to their editor, because they were going to do all the photos, the editing, the whole 9 yards. I literally had to create the recipes and write the copy. And that had to be done by the end of March 2011. So I had 3 months. And so I had a choice whether to step out, because I knew that I couldn't work in the retail business.
Not if you're going to do that in 3 months flat.
And do that in 3 months. And so at that point, I was working in the business, albeit every day except for 1 day a week. And I'm just like, what do I do? Because I can't turn this opportunity down, but I'm going to have to make a choice. And I was like, I can't say no. And so I just said, look, to my partner at the time, I'm like, look, you are going to have to step up and take the reins. And he completely freaked out because I'd never really, I'd sort of, managed everything.
Trained him.
I hadn't trained him. Well, he was untrainable, to be fair. But I did have this Aussie guy, Doug.
Yes.
So I was like, okay. So I said to Doug, look, this is
your chance, mate.
What's going to happen? How about, and I knew that I couldn't manage my then partner, but I knew that he wasn't a good manager of people, but I knew that Doug was. And I said, okay, we need to just make this between ourselves, but let's have a conversation. I have a weekly meeting on the phone and you tell me what's going on in the shop. You manage the team, because the money was coming from the piercing studio, not necessarily from the shop floor. So as long as he could just like keep it going, and my ex was great on the shop floor. So as long as that was all going fine, the money was coming in through the studio. So I really needed Doug on board. And so I was like, this is what's going to happen. And I'm like, and he was like, yeah, cool. We can do this. And it just worked so well. And it meant that I had someone on the ground who was like managing the team stealthily, who they all liked, who they all got on with.
He was just a natural leader then.
Yeah, naturally. And then I could crack on with my book and everything was hopefully
going to
be fine. And it was during that period where we actually turned a profit. And that was the most humbling thing of my life.
The fact that you turned a profit when you weren't there.
Yes.
God, that's a lesson.
That was the biggest lesson. And because I'd let go of the reins and I was actually doing something that I really enjoyed, writing this book, rediscovered my love of writing. I also had time and brain space to myself. I had the freedom that I really wanted. We start a business because we want to be free, and then we create this ball and chain of a job for ourselves if we're not careful, which is one of the things.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The advances royalties are notoriously terrible when it's a traditional publisher, and advances are pretty terrible. Did the advance cover your 3 months like money from the shop, or did it cover a year, or what kind of?
It was about £5,000. So it was not very much. I would have done it for free.
Oh, right.
Because I just wanted the opportunity to write the book. And for me, like that $5,000 was like, oh wow, they're actually going to pay me to do this.
Bonus. Yeah.
That's a bonus. Yeah, it was not for that, because actually I was like, I am not really that interested in writing a natural beauty book. I want to write a perfume book. But in my head, it was
a step along the way.
It was like, if I say yes to this, I'm saying yes to the universe. I'm saying yes to the I've manifested. I'm not saying actually, well, I don't want that. I'm saying yes, but also it was a decent publisher. It was Ryland Peters and Small. It was an imprint. It was Seco Books, which was an imprint of Ryland Peters and Small, which were a great publisher. And I'm like, okay, maybe further down the line, I can pitch them a perfume book and they'll publish it, which
so
they
just
did.
A one book deal. They weren't trying to
Yeah, no, it was a one book deal. It was written to a brief. They were like, okay, this is what we want it to be. We want this many recipes. We want it to be like a cookery book for skincare. It's got to be all natural. And you give us an outline. You're the expert. You give us an outline and we'll go back and forth and what have you. And my only caveat in that was that I wanted to have some perfume recipes in there as well. I wanted to do a perfume oil recipe and something else that could then segue me into the fragrance thing. And also, by the time I'd written it, they were like, okay, well, we're looking for someone to do a foreword for the book. And by the time I'd finished writing it, I was already starting to think about doing perfume classes. And actually, it was, I think in 2010, I'd already started to teach perfume making classes, but I didn't have an audience. I didn't have anyone who knew who I was. But just by chance, coincidentally, I'd bumped into one of my old Neal's Yard colleagues in Sainsbury's at Clapham Junction, as you do. And I said, oh, I'm teaching perfume workshops. And she was like, oh, really? Neal's Yard are looking to do a natural perfume workshop. Maybe you'd like have a conversation with Susan. It's one of my old colleagues. And so I had a conversation with Susan and she said, well, yeah, do you want to write a workshop for us? We'll pay you to write the workshop if you can deliver it. And then so that was that. So that my first perfume workshop was actually for Neal's Yard. Then I was still in touch with Romy Fraser, who was the founder, who'd since sold the company and had her own. She'd bought a farm, organic farm down in Dorset, and she was doing workshops in a variety of things like foraging, baking. And I said to her, look, this is what I'm doing now. Do you want me to come and do something for you at Trill? And she said, yes, please. So I'd kind of like reached back out to those colleagues. And so that's where I was like, okay, I need to have some accountability to do these perfume classes. And so my first class I wrote for Neal's Yard, and that formed the basis of my first perfume making class. And then the second one I did, which was more of a 3-day, I think it was a 2 or 3 day class, a bit more stretched out, was for Romy. And so it was my kind of practice runs and they got me the audience. I didn't have to rustle up an audience. And so
presumably she kept, when she sold Neal's Yard, she still kept some of the database.
Yeah, I think so. And moreover, more than that, I actually said, oh, I wonder if Romy would do the foreword for my natural beauty book. And so I said to the publisher, well, I could ask her if you want. And they were like, oh my God, that would be such a coup.
It's incredible.
And then Romy said, yeah, of course I will. Yeah, of course. And so she did the foreword for the natural beauty book. And I mean, that's still in print now. That came out in 2011 and that still sells really well. It's probably been I don't even know how many covers or iterations or variations. It's been translated into different languages.
And do you still get any royalties from it?
Yeah, I mean, I still get minuscule royalties from it. But then I pitched the perfume book and they said no. And then because it was too soon. And then they came back to me, I think it was 2013, and said, or the end of 2012, I think, they said, I'd sent them a manuscript and an outline and what have you. And they were like, oh, no, not at the moment, but maybe, in a couple of years or whatever. And then they came back to me at the end, I think it was the end of 2012, or it might have been the beginning of 2013. And they were like, okay, if you want that perfume book, we can do it. But here's the deal. And the advance was the same. The royalties were 50% lower than what they were before. So they were really low before. So it was terrible. So I'm like, okay, I'm barely getting anything for this, but they knew that I really wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But they said, but we've only got a window of this much time. So you've got to do it in 3 months. So I had another, they said, no. And then yes, but 3 months. So yeah.
And same advance, but so did anyone know about self-publishing in those days? I can't remember.
No, not really. No, I mean maybe they did, but it wasn't. I wasn't aware of it.
No, they weren't going to tell you. I mean, I published the Money Gym through Debs and Joe at Lean Marketing, as it became. And then I think I did a self-published one. Then I went back to them for another one. And then to redo the Money Gym, or it might have been a different title. But then I've self-published everything ever since.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think I didn't know when I pitched the perfume book to them, I wasn't really aware of self-publishing.
No.
I think I kind of was, because I think Tom I would have talked about
Yes,
it.
he
But
would have known about it.
yeah,
He?
but I think what it was at the time is that, and I think this was probably the reason why I went with it rather than self-publishing, was because, you know, it was like, okay, what is the purpose of this book? Is it for money or is it for credibility? And I think I got the credibility from the beauty book because that was, you know, traditionally published, but it was almost like I wanted credibility in the perfume niche, because even though there was crossover, I felt at the time it was quite different.
Yeah.
Because the perfume industry was a very different industry from the natural beauty, Niels Yardy kind of industry. So I kind of wanted to have a traditionally published kind of calling card, kudos type of a book.
It definitely does that. It opens doors. Sure. And it does definitely give you credibility, especially being published through a good publisher like that.
Yeah. And so, and also they would furnish Amazon. It was distributed through Macmillan Publishing.
Yeah.
And so it was all very legit and what have you. But I have to say that now, if I was coming into this now, would I do the same thing? Possibly I would if I was just starting out. But writing another book now, I would definitely not go with a traditional publisher. I would definitely self-publish, because those two kudos books, if you like, they've kind of done their job.
Yeah.
And they've helped me create a really solid foundation and credibility for my business and what I do, that it's almost like I don't feel like I need a traditional publisher now.
No, that's right. And I'm sure.
And I think we've come a long way.
People don't realise how incredibly tiny the royalties are.
I literally make no money from my perfume book.
Yeah.
I make no royalties from it because the advance has not even been paid out.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. You have to recoup any advance. It's the same as the music industry, isn't it? The bands have to recoup the advance before they get paid.
And I think I make, I mean, my beauty book, I think I still only make about 50p a copy.
Yeah.
And about 25 people.
When do the deals expire?
Well, no, I'm out of contract. So I'm out of contract with both of them, but they own the I own the copy of both books, but they own the photography and the layout.
Oh, okay.
So if I was to read, and the beauty book still is, they're still printing that. The perfume book is out of print officially, but I ended up buying a print run myself. So I've got mountains of those books to sell through. But I don't know, like when I've got rid of those, I'm going to then try and renegotiate. I'm going to try and renegotiate getting the the photography back, because photography from them, because if you then have to pay to reshoot an entire book that is very photography heavy, and the layout, I kind of tossed up whether it was cheaper to do that or buy a print run, and it actually worked out, I don't know, cheaper to buy the print run, because I would still have
in terms of your time.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's why I haven't gone any further with those books. But they're still on Amazon. I'm still selling both of those books really well.
So you're now doing workshops. You're down in Devon doing
So I left Croydon in 2016 and moved to the New Forest. So I'm in the New Forest, just south of Salisbury. And when I moved out of London, so I still had Time Bomb, but me and my ex split up in 2015. And so he still carried on working in the business. I was still the sole director, shareholder, whatever. But I had at that point had been out of the business for so long that I wasn't really running the day to day. I was literally, making sure the staff got paid, the ordering was done properly, like the regulations were being, adhered to, like all of the sort of grown up back of house stuff. And he was doing the front of house stuff for a long time. So actually me moving didn't make any difference. But when you are running a business as a couple, it is one thing, but when you are no longer a couple, it becomes more and more difficult. And it was actually quite hard to run the business with him anyway, even when we were together. And it just became more and more impossible over the time that we were apart. And especially not being in London anymore and not being able to drop in unannounced and check up on things. And so I exited that business in 2018. The business is still running.
Wow.
He's turned it into just a tattoo and body piercing studio, ditched the clothing side. I was trying to figure out a way of exiting the business, knowing that I was basically paying his wages and he couldn't afford to buy me out.
Yeah. Did you have any of your money back by then?
Debatable, not really particularly. We paid off all of the debt. Actually, so the business had paid off all of the debt, so I was debt free, and that was quite a funny thing, actually. I do think about this sometimes. The business had basically paid back all of my credit card debt, so I was like ground zero by the end of 2014. Wow. And then 2015 we split up.
And what happened to Doug? We all want to know what happened to Doug.
We all want to know what happened to Doug. So Doug only had a 2-year visa, unfortunately. So he went back to Australia, and his idea was always to go back to Oz to set up his own studio, which he did, because it was like running our studio was a dry run for his own business. So he was very, very entrepreneurial. And I said, well, look, you treat this like, you were setting up your own business. He knew how to run a studio, but he didn't know anything about business. So we did a little bit of a symbiotic thing where he would come to me with, questions. Yeah. And I would talk to him about the business side of things, and he would teach me really about how to run a studio. And I said, treat it as a dry run for when you go back home and do your own thing. And that's what he did. And now I think I haven't seen him for years, but he's in Ireland. Him and his wife are in Ireland. And they have their own studio. He has his own studio there, I think.
Oh, you should get in touch. And what I'm finding with these interviews is it's making people remember things.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Philippa, who I interviewed yesterday, she actually had got ended up getting in touch with one of the first people who gave her one of her first jobs. So
it's crazy. And then and so I exited the business in 2018. I actually gave the business to my ex.
Yeah.
Because I knew that he couldn't buy me out. And I was just like, look,
you just wanted to walk away, didn't you?
I just wanted to walk away. I wanted to walk out of, get away. And actually the universe answered I was trying to figure out a way of making it work. And I was putting it off. And then I got a letter from the landlord to say that actually we were being evicted from this premise that we'd had, because we had a rolling lease again. And we'd moved in 2007, and this was 2018. So we'd had a good run of it. But finally, they'd decided that actually that was all going to be redeveloped and it was all going to be demolished, and we had to move. And I thought, do you know what? This is a really good opportunity for me. And I said to him, look, this is what's happening. We can either wind up the business, shut the whole thing down, or you can just take it and do what you want, really. You can have the stock, the staff, the systems, the mailing list, the website. Basically, you can have all of it. And it was making a profit by that time. It was a profitable business. Well, he doesn't think so still. But anyway, that's a whole other story. Because I gave him everything apart from the relatively small amount of money that was in the bank account. Because otherwise I would have had nothing.
Well, and you, were you paying the interest on that debt all that time?
Yes.
The business.
Yes. The business was paying for it. Oh, right. The business was paying for it. But I took minimum wage for the entirety of the business. Yeah. Anyway, so that's by the by.
You must have learnt lessons from doing
I
that.
learned some very big lessons in that even if you lay it out for some people are just never really going to appreciate what you've done. And I think you have to, I think one of the things with, with the advent of social media and all of that, I think like I learned to let go of stuff because, there's huge parts of me that want to actually say, well, actually, this is how it was and this is how it went down. But, you can't really say those things publicly on social media. You've got to be very mindful, very careful, even when, people have, misled others about how things are.
Yeah.
That was one of the big things for me, just letting it go, just let it go, let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Where did you say you moved to?
The New Forest. So I'm on the edge of the New Forest, just south of Salisbury. I'm 7 miles south of Salisbury.
Okay.
So
what pulled you down there? Was there anything in specific? And did you sell
not
your
really.
house in Croydon, or?
No, I've still got the house in Croydon. I rent that out. I've got my I'm an accidental landlord now. Yeah, so there was not a particular reason other than I knew I wanted to be out of London. I didn't know where I wanted to live, but I did have, and my partner wanted to move out of London. We both wanted to move out of Croydon, to be honest. And because I think it's really hard, like if you are a couple, if you're running a business as a couple and everybody knows, and it's a community-led business, which ours was, when that dynamic is no longer working, and everything, every kind of like everywhere you go, it's that. Neither of you can move on. Yeah. And I'd stepped away from the business, so I was the one who probably had to step away and make a fresh start.
Yeah.
And it was time, and I'd wanted to move out of Croydon for a really long time, didn't know where I wanted to be. Anyway, like my partner had a friend down in Barton-on-Sea, on the coast here, and then I've got a friend who is in White Parish, so just on the edge of the New Forest, and we'd come through the forest to visit these two friends on different occasions. I'm like, it's actually really nice here. It's lovely, why don't we? And honestly, I didn't want to buy anywhere. I didn't want to let go of my house, and so we just decided one day to look on Rightmove, pick 5 properties that fit the bill to rent. Mm-hmm. And then drive up one Saturday morning, look at all 5 and just pick one.
Make a decision.
Make a decision. Yeah. And so we just picked one, the best of the bunch, and
it's a starting point.
Moved as a starting point, and we lived there for 8 months. Wasn't ideal, and then we found the place that we're in now, and we moved here as another sort of stepping stone. But that was back in 2016. That was December 2016. And we absolutely love it. It's on a farm. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's on a private estate.
I remember hearing some of this from Judith.
Yeah, so it's on a private estate. So you wouldn't even know that we're here. There's like 8 cottages, I think, here. There's a manor that's owned by 2 sisters, and it's a working farm. They rent the fields to a beef farmer. Everybody's lovely. Most of the people that live here have lived here long term. They'd want long-term tenants. We don't really want to move. And I was thinking, I thought of you actually, because you were a long-term tenant for a while, weren't you, in a place?
I still am.
Oh, you still are? Okay, yeah, because there was always this thing of like, oh, you've got to buy. We have this thing in the UK, we've got to own our own houses. And I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was you, maybe it was Judith or someone else. It doesn't matter if you don't, if you don't own your own home, as long as you own somebody else's.
Your own property, yeah.
Yeah,
it was a very big deal in the money, June, was to work out financially what was best for you and gave you your life goals. And for me, I've got all my money in other investments because they're in a part of the wealth creation cycle that is going up, whereas I believe property is about to go down. It's, even though Savills have said it's going to go up 25% in the next 5 years, there's a massive financial crash coming, just like, worse than the one in 2008. So I'd really rather have my money in things that are likely to go up during a financial crash rather than things that are likely to go down. So yeah. just rent. I've got an amazing flat. It looks out over the river in Shoreham. I've got incredible views of the water. Couldn't possibly, I mean, it's 500,000 to buy one of these 2-bedroom flats here.
Right. So this was the other thing that I was saying, I've said to a lot of people, the house that I live now, it's a detached house. We're surrounded by fields. If I were to buy something like this, I don't even know how. I mean,
You'd be
you don't
putting
even
your capital into something that
exactly
you have to maintain, and you probably wouldn't be able to afford the location you're in at the moment.
No, wouldn't be able to afford the location, and definitely wouldn't be able to afford the type of property. And also, I did the maths on it, and like I'm 54 years old, and when you look at
don't look it.
when you look at the interest, and I added up the mortgage, so my partner would have to sell his flat because he's still got his property in Croydon that he rents out.
And
so
those
we've got
properties are going up far more in value than anything down
right.
the country would.
So we've got 2 properties that we're renting out. The houses of this size and they're just so expensive around here.
Yeah.
And also, if we decided, we wanted to downsize or move, these sorts of big properties are not selling very quickly.
No, exactly.
They're hard to shift. Also, the location, we're on a private family generational estate. Like we would literally not be able to buy this house. They just don't leave the family. And to buy something like this, you'd be looking in the millions. Even to get the sort of land that we've got. And
do you garden? Are you growing things?
Yeah, so we've got an outdoor wood-fired sauna cabin.
Oh, nice.
In the garden.
Wow.
We've got 3, soon to probably be 5 vegetable plots. And that doesn't even disturb the lawn, My partner he does a lot of woodwork, he does a lot of home renovations, that kind of thing. And he's got a workshop. One of the sort of old barns on the farm is like he's renting that
amazing.
For his work. And he's got he's actually refurbing a shepherd's hut at the moment to sell. Yeah. And that's parked outside by some hay bales on the farm. We get on really, really well with the landowners here, the farmer. And then I rent a studio. So I teach perfume making classes in person now. Majority of what I do is online. And that was intentional. I launched my first online course for my perfume making stuff in 2013, actually, but I didn't really do much with it because I was still very much in the retail business and I was still very much teaching in-person classes in London. And that was like my nice little thing to tick me over. And I wasn't really treating it like a proper business. But when we moved to the forest, I realized that I didn't want to go lugging all my gear into London. Yeah. And it was actually quite hard to get people down here. And so I thought, you know what, 2016, 2017, I'm going to go all in on online.
Wow.
So I went all in on online. And then, and this is going to make you laugh, the end of 2019, I was like, do you know what? I'm really feeling I've been focused online. I haven't really done many in-person classes. 2020 is going to be the year for me where I'm going to go back to full in-person classes. And I found a studio that was an old converted stable not on our farm, but it's on another kind of landowner's estate. There's a stately home called Bremer House, and it's the Hulse family own Bremer House stately home. They've got like a museum and a farm shop, and then they've got loads of cottages and other farms dotted around. They're a big landowner. But I found this property, and I'm like, oh my God, I've got to have it. I must have it. And this is where I'm going to do all my workshops, and I'm going to go back to in person. And I got the keys. We did it up. My other half did it up. And I did my first in-person class in January 2020, completely sold out.
Oh.
And then March came around and it was tumbleweeds, and it was like, then that was that. So
what did you do?
So I turned it into a recording studio for my online classes. So I'd already put the groundwork into my online courses, and people said to me, how can you teach perfume making online? You can't do that because people have got to smell everything. And I'm like, there has got to be a way. There is a way. I can teach the theory, I can teach the experience, and I can give people the resources to go source their own materials.
I can teach people how to
evaluate their own, like rather than relying on me telling them whether it's good enough or not, how can I teach them how to self-evaluate? How can I teach them how to be confident in their own practice? How can I teach them to be confident in creating for themselves, And so I really leaned into a lot of the mindset stuff in my programs, as well as it's not just perfume making, it was the business side of it. It was the social media side. It was the mindset. It was all of the stuff that I'd learned over the course of my life in personal development and running other types of business. I put into that and really kind of went down the rabbit hole of learning how to build funnels and, did the old Bronson one funnel away thingamy.
That one funnel challenge was absolutely brilliant. I learned a lot through going through that. And I'd already had sort of 10, 15 years.
Right. And so a lot of it, when I went through it, was like, oh, yeah, I remember the stuff that we'd done with Brett McFall back in 2007. And it wasn't rocket science. It wasn't anything new, but it was like I had a different lens to see it through, where I could actually see how I could use it within my business to make a difference. And I started doing launches. I started doing webinar launches. And nobody was doing webinar launches for perfume making. And I don't think they are still.
A bit like when I was running Google AdWords for my bed and breakfast. Nobody in the whole area was running Google ads for their bed and breakfast.
No.
When you can take a tool like that and bring it to a new market, it just opens up so many possibilities. I'm so thrilled to hear all this. I can't tell you.
And so I learned so much from those days, but it was all I learned so much. And one of the things that I learned actually was how to pivot, how to be resilient, the whole E-myth thing where, do what is in your zone of genius, wear all the hats at the beginning, you have to do that. But then think about how to outsource slowly and gradually to people who are better at those things than you are. Also, doing something, creating a business, and this was the thing that I didn't mention from the Time Bomb days, is that I realized through coaching, through, the mistakes that I made along the way, that one of the most important things is to make sure that when you are creating a business, you're not doing it just because you can. And it's like, I think that I wrote a blog post about it once, and I called it the curse of the creative woman, although it applies to men obviously too, that, creative types have lots of ideas, and a lot of us are very, very competent at a lot of things. And just because, and this was a Judithism probably, I think, who knows, just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. And so you used to say that all the time as well. So it was definitely from those days.
Yeah.
And what I realized was with Time Bomb, it's like I created that business because I could. I don't know, it just was an idea and a whim, and I started it, and that was that. And then I woke up one day to realize that I'd created a prison for myself because I hadn't really thought through, what is the life that I want to live? What is my place of joy? Do I really know what I'm getting myself into? I.e., I never liked working 9 to 5. I didn't want to work for, I didn't want to have to show up every day and put my game face on. And if that is not you, and if you're not I'm an introvert, I didn't even know what that was at the time. I learned all of those things through doing something where I had to show up and put my game face on 24/7, 7 days a week. And I was absolutely burnt out, exhausted, broken, because it wasn't what I'm naturally. I could do it. Of course I could do it. I was competent at it, but it wasn't what made me happy.
This confident introvert thing is something that I've realised over the years. I always thought of myself as an extrovert, but I'm not. I'm someone who, it takes a lot out of me. I used to come back from those workshops and I used to have to not speak to anyone for 3 days. And I think it's a new thing that sort of people are realising now, that if you can, you've got to find a way of having a business that works for you in your personality type and your strengths and your skills. I mean, you've mentioned it several times, things that bring you joy.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting, the confident introvert. I didn't really even know what an introvert or an extrovert was at the time, because I don't think it was the sort of conversations that we had. But people, I don't know. I think because I worked in retail, I thought that was what I loved, being around people. But actually, I discovered that I found it really exhausting. And I thought for many, many years, there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because I would just get so tired and feel so burnt out. And I thought, oh my God, maybe I've got ME. Maybe I've got, yuppie flu, as they called it at the time. Maybe
Yes,
I've got like
yes.
some autoimmune. Maybe I'm ill. And I honestly thought maybe I'm ill because I can't do this like other people can do this.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, well, I don't feel very introverted because I'm not shy. I'm confident. I don't feel anxious. I've never had anxiety. I
I
don't,
could get on stage in front of 1,000 people quite happily. And
yeah. So,
my thing. Yeah. But
and
then,
so it was like, I didn't know what it was. And then when I really started to understand that actually the introversion thing, it's more about the energy, whether something gives you energy or saps your energy. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, that's it.
yeah.
It like going to run a workshop, it doesn't necessarily give me energy. Like it makes me happy. I enjoy it while I'm in it. It's fun, but I don't want to do it every day.
No.
And actually, I need to have downtime after I've done it. So if I do like a 3-day workshop, so I run a 3-day perfume making class now, so I can do a 3-day class, but then I'll need to take a couple of days out and just not speak to anyone because I give it my all.
The other thing I find that really made the difference was I used to do a lot of workshops on my own, and didn't really, I enjoyed them in the moment, but I used to dread them. But doing it with other people helped enormously. So Judith would be the person who made sure that everyone was happy and everything was running right. Steve used to deal with all the tech and the food and make sure all that was good. And all I had to do was pitch up and be brilliant. So that was really great fun. But as soon as I had to go back to doing it on my own again, it wasn't great fun anymore. And I'd much rather do, something like this or something, again, speaking to 1,000 people on stage or speaking to 1,000 people online, perfectly fine with that. Love that. Doesn't take any energy at all.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting thing. I mean, I teach on my own, but what I do is I have very small groups. So my group classes now are 8 people max, so they're 6 to 8 people, whereas when I was doing them in London they were like 15, 17. They were bigger groups, and I found them very exhausting.
And how often do you do them now, Karen?
Not so, and actually that's the other thing, it's like not massively often. So I do 5 1-day classes a year, and I do 2 or 3 3-day classes a year.
Do you use them to test new ideas out for the stuff you put online, a bit like a comic when they go out on a small tour?
No, not at all, actually. It's a kind of a rinse and repeat class. So it's got a structure, and it is what it is. Every class is going to be slightly different depending on the audience.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do ask questions. And I think because I've been doing this for so long now, so what are we now in 2024? So I've been teaching 14 years, and essentially I've been teaching the same 2 in-person classes over and over again. But because they're very practical, people had come to them more than once. So the theory will be the same. And I've refined them over the time that I've been doing them. The class that I taught back in 2010 is not the same as the class that I teach now, because I've improved it. I've cut things out. I've added things in. I don't really test out new material because they are very, there's only so, you've got to keep them very timed and tight, because there's only so much you can get in with a very, very big topic. But what I do more is test out new material with my online audience. And so I have a mastermind group. So the program that I created back in 2013, which was a 6-module online course, now is my year-long mastermind program. Okay. So I've grown that over the years. And so that core group, they tell me what they want, what they don't, what they need more help with. I see the questions that come up time and time and time and time again. And so then I would say, okay, right, we're going to do a masterclass on this. And then I will put that out to my audience and then sell it as a small standalone. And then I'll probably incorporate it into the mastermind in some way. Okay. I launched last July, I launched my own podcast. So, Yeah, so the perfume making podcast does what it says on the tin.
That's brilliant. So have you got a YouTube channel?
I have, but I don't use it really. It's one of the things that really I've always known that trips me up is that doing video is I just find it really difficult. I really struggle with doing video. I do lives, I can talk to people. I hate doing 1 minute TikToks.
Oh yeah,
Like
I can't
one
get into
minute
that.
TikToks,
Can't get into it at all.
YouTube
Although it's easy to
videos.
reset it, yeah.
If I'm interviewing someone or someone's interviewing me, I'm more than happy to be on camera, not a problem. But
Yeah.
actually creating content to fit within the constraints of video,
Yeah,
it's
it's too hard.
just
Yeah.
it's for me it's too hard. So I
Is
do
your
an
podcast
audio
audio
only.
then?
Yeah, it's just audio only. And the guys who edit and produce that for me I literally got a WhatsApp today saying, oh, we're just checking in to see whether, you want to upgrade to our video package. And I'm like, no, because I know that I wouldn't want to do it.
You wouldn't want to do it.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to do it because it is a bit like making sure the lighting's right, making sure your makeup's on, your hair's done and all of that. And I think part of me over the years, if I'm showing up live, I kind of let the perfectionist bit go. I just like let it go. It's fine.
totally
However
let
I
that
look
go.
and however it is how it is.
Yeah.
But I know that if I'm having to record content to a script or to keep myself within a set piece of a structure of a content with call to action or content with I just find it too hard to do the face to camera stuff. And I think a lot of what I teach, a lot of what I talk about on my podcast as well, I do some interviews, but the majority of it is a how to solo show. And so unless I've got slides on the screen, I'm literally just talking head, and that doesn't really work on YouTube. And so if you've got a back and forth conversation, or if you so what they've suggested to me is we can still do the talking head, but we can cut it with B-roll. We can intersperse it with B-roll. That cool, that would be fine. But again, it's still a little bit of a not quite sure about that yet.
Yeah, I do think it would work for your business brilliantly, but I also think if you don't enjoy it, don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure, I still get traffic. I've got a few videos up on YouTube.
How do you get leads to your online business?
Well, I'm in the process. I've literally just hired someone to sort out my Google Analytics for me so that I actually know.
Do you host all your material on your own website then?
Yeah. So I do kind of. Yeah. So I'm in a bit of a mishmash. I think like any entrepreneur, who's cobbled stuff together over the years. I've got a WordPress website. I've got my social media channels. I have got YouTube. I still get traffic from YouTube. So videos that I put up back in 2013 still get me traffic. I've got my Instagram account that drives traffic. I did set up a TikTok channel a year and a half ago, sort of fell off the wagon with TikTok, but I still get, because of the way TikTok works as almost like a YouTube type long tail SEO type of a thing. I still get people. I haven't posted a video on TikTok for a long time, but people are still following me, liking and commenting on my videos in the same way that they do with YouTube. I get traffic from Pinterest. I've got someone who just set up a Pinterest account for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would think Pinterest would be good for you.
Pinterest is huge. I think that's my biggest following is on Pinterest, weirdly enough. I don't even touch it really. So my traffic really comes from all of my social media channels. It now also comes from my podcast because I do get found on that.
Yeah.
Organically. Because
and where do you host the podcast?
It's on a platform called Omni Studio.
You've got an RSS feed for that.
Yeah.
You can put it on your YouTube channel as a podcast.
Yeah, I've been advised not to do that. I've been told by my agency that I work with not to do that.
Okay.
And so the reason I was told not to do that is because the negatives outweigh the benefits in that situation, because I get a certain amount of downloads every month on my podcast, all my episodes. However, what they have told me is that you will get less reach on YouTube than you do on your podcast app. Because if you are doing an audio only and you just put that up on YouTube, you won't get as many views or listens on YouTube as you will on your podcast app. But the difference is the listens on YouTube or views, as it were, are visible publicly, whereas the ones on the podcast app are not. And so, for example, I think my stats for, I mean, some of my episodes have got 3,000 listens. My overall, last month we had about 8,500 downloads for, which is not huge, but for a relatively niche and fairly new podcast, I'm pretty happy with it. But I know that on YouTube, I probably would get a fraction of that. And so what they've said to me is that people will see that and think that you've got not many, your podcast isn't that popular, and you're not getting as many. So they've said to me that it's a negative. So unless you do a video and really put your work into growing that as a channel, it isn't worth it.
Okay. Well, they're the experts, so you trust them, and you've got to listen to their advice. I mean, the only thing I would say is that YouTube is now the biggest podcast platform in the world, even beating Apple.
Yeah, so they might change their view on that. They may well do, but for the moment, that's why I haven't.
I put Own It, the podcast, up there, all 287 episodes of it, because we didn't want to keep paying for hosting, and we wanted to keep it, but we didn't want. And all we had to do was feed the RSS feed through. Yeah. And automatically went onto YouTube, and it's, well, obviously Judith dying very sadly has boosted the listens, because people are going back to the beginning now and going again. But it was already outdoing any other platform that I was tracking.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So I'm never say never, because I did think of doing that.
Yeah, I think about your own podcast. My own podcast, I listen to things with Overcast when I'm going to sleep most of the time. But if I'm awake and I'm listening to a podcast, I probably would go to YouTube to put it on.
So I use Spotify. I wouldn't. I very rarely
Spotify
use
as well, but only for Joe Rogan.
So, right? Yeah, I don't really use YouTube for anything. I'm not a YouTube.
Can't stand the ads on Spotify, and won't pay for ad-free just for one or two podcasts. But I do pay for ad-free on YouTube, so I don't get any ads listening to podcasts.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe. So what they suggested to me anyway is to take each piece of each podcast episode and create a 10-minute segment.
That's a good idea, to test it.
And test it. But also what they want me to do actually is to film every new podcast I record from now on in, to just film it. So
that's why I'm doing these interviews on Zoom, so that they're video as well as audio.
But I haven't done that because I prefer to do audio. I like audio. I just, I don't know.
All of what we've been talking about today is about building a business to love and sticking to it, but trying new things just as an experiment for fun. And so tell me, I've got 3 questions for you. I could talk to you for hours, obviously, but time's running out. What's been the high point of your career today, and what's been the low point of your career today?
Oh,
your entrepreneurial journey.
Oh my Lord. I think there have been lots of low points. I think every business owner has lots of low points because it is that sort of up and down. I think the low point, actually, the first thing that comes to mind is the low point was realizing that I had created a business for someone else and not for myself. And that I had put a lot of time and energy and money and blood, sweat and tears and, life into something that wasn't in alignment for me. And it wasn't actually for me. I'd created a business for someone else, essentially. So realizing that was kind of a bit of oh God, what did I do? Because I did it for a long, long time. And then I think the high point, oh God, there've been loads of high points as well.
That's good, isn't it?
I don't know necessarily whether there's like one major high point. I think probably the getting that first book deal, manifesting that first book deal was like,
yeah,
yeah, that was. But actually, I think the high. No, do you know what? Actually, the real high, a more recent high point actually is that I get so many emails from people now in my perfume business that so my target audience is, we niche, you kind of find your niche over time. And the people that really I help now, for the most part, are people who really who have a dream of starting their own business, doing something creative, making perfume and turning it into a business or a side hustle, or actually even just learning how to make a fragrance that they love and they're happy with in an industry that has told them historically that you can't do that unless you follow a very specific path, or you have been to this school, or you are part of this elite group. And through my podcast, actually, more so than my courses, I mean, I get loads of lovely emails from my courses and I've got students who give me feedback in real time. But I think the podcast reaches more people because it's free and I don't hold back on that podcast. I teach on that podcast. Yeah. And I know that, my programs are relatively high ticket, and I know that I can't help everyone through that method because not everybody is going to be able to afford the time that it takes to complete that, or the money to sign up and work with me closely. But the high points are those emails from people that have said, oh my God, I've been listening to your podcast from the beginning. I've listened to every single episode and I have learned so much from you. And you've really helped to make me feel that I can actually do this.
That's
and
amazing.
So I think the high points will always be, for me, knowing that I've empowered people to have some sense of freedom, whatever it looks like for them. And actually, I think that is one of my core values, is freedom, which I think it is for many of us. And I know Judith had that as a core value for sure. And pretty much, anybody who was involved in the money gym in those days, it was all about freedom, right? It was being able to do what you want on your own terms and have the freedom to make your own money and what have you. So whatever that looks like for them, enabling people to have that freedom of choosing, one, whether they just want to make a perfume for themselves. So choosing what goes into their product that they put on their skin so they actually don't have to buy it off the shelf. Or if they want to do it as a business, they can do that. And I always say that, one of the things that I've learned is I'm a teacher first, because people always say to me, oh, well, why have you not got your own perfume brand, your own perfume range? And I've never done that. I've never created one for myself. I've tussled with it over the years. And there are so many reasons why I haven't. But one of them was, if I kept coming out of my bricks and mortar business, Time Bomb, the last thing I wanted was to be tied down with stock and, things and stuff that I had to sell. So that was that from the beginning. And then as I've moved more into, being an expert in this realm, and, it would be relatively painless probably to start my own brand now. And, I teach other people how to do it and what have you, and I could do that. But actually, the thing that brings me joy and the thing that lights me up is the teaching part. And this is one of the things that I always say to people.
Aren't you? You're changing people's
lives. I can reach more people by teaching other people how to do the thing than just doing the thing myself.
Yeah. It's like everyone says to me, why don't you start another agency to do digital marketing? Because I'd rather teach people. I'd rather empower people to be able to do their own digital marketing.
It's about free. So one of the things is about freedom. So I don't want to be tied down to things and stuff and warehouses of stock, but also I want to be able to empower people as well. And I think if you are creating a product and selling someone a unit, a widget or whatever, that's great, and that might change their life and they might have a lovely experience with it, but it's not good. Yeah, and smell good, but it's not ticking the empowering other people
Yeah.
box for me. And I trained back in 2018, actually, I trained as a meditation teacher because I really wanted to delve into that a bit more for my own spiritual practice. And I did actually kind of come up with a few ideas for product lines back in 2010 before I kind of took the teaching route. And I wanted to delve into that. And I always knew that there was going to be an element of mindset and spirituality and self-care and well-being. And, I've also created some programs around that for my audience as well. So one of the big things that fascinated me about scent was how it affects our well-being and our mindset and how it can shift your mood.
I'm here all on my own, just had a shower, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to put some perfume on. And it really
Yeah.
made me feel nice.
And so I created a program around that called the Scent Shift, which melds my knowledge of scent and fragrance marketing specifically, and how it all works in the industry, and psychology and mindset and meditation, melded the two together as a kind of a well-being pathway. So even if people don't want to make perfume, they don't want to do anything like that, they can still use it as a tool for their own kind of well-being and transformation as well. And so one of the things that all of this stuff really taught me was that, I'm a teacher first. So I could teach mindset, well-being, I could teach business, I could teach marketing, I could teach all sorts. And the reason that I landed on perfume making is because that was what my career was in. That was what I was an expert in when I first started. Like, now 14 years later, having run two businesses and having done all of that personal development and having learned all of those other things, of course, we have other strings to our bow, but yeah, it's teaching first, teaching, empowering others. And I think the online world gives us so much more ability and freedom to do that than we had back in the day when we were all running analog businesses and having to tramp the streets to give out flyers.
So what's next for you? What have you got anything that you'd really like to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I really want to I want to actually delve more into the well-being side of my business. So, and actually what I want to do really is not step away from the perfume thing, but I know that I've spent the last 14 years building a personal brand that is much more than just fragrance.
Yeah.
And I want to start exploring other things. And I don't know what that looks like yet, particularly, but I am going to be doing my advanced meditation teacher training. And so I definitely think that it is going to involve some kind of well-being, personal development type of a thing. Fragrance will always creep in somewhere along the line. But yeah, I do want to, create another business that is more of a well-being business rather than a teaching people how to make perfume to launch a brand kind of business, if that makes sense.
I get it entirely. Karen Gilbert, what a pleasure it's been to talk to you again and to catch up on all these years that have gone past and to reminisce with someone who knew Judith and who Judith had such a big impact on their life. And it's been a real pleasure. And thank you very much for stepping up when I asked for willing victims.
Thanks so much. It's just one of those things. I saw the post at the right time, right time and right place. And hats off to Judith. I think Judith brought a lot of people together.
She did. Amazing.
And
She brought people together.
And actually, continues to do that with her passing as well, because I connected with so many people that I hadn't seen for years.
Yeah.
Well, including yourself. And it was just that little trigger of memories. And I think that Judith's memory and her sort of way of being, actually, there are so many touch points in my life that that I remember during this conversation with you that were heavily influenced by things that she'd said or people that she'd introduced me to, or events that we'd gone to that she would, had helped facilitate. And I do think that that's something that's a massive legacy.
Yeah,
and
that's why I think people are going back to the podcast if you go to YouTube and search Own It, the podcast, you'll find it.
Yeah.
And that's the way to have captured a bit of a tiny bit of a magic, really.
Right. And I think that is such a, that's a goal, to have that kind of legacy, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that is the beauty of today's world with digital, with online, with podcasts, actually, because, we can immortalize, people, can't we, in that?
That's awesome. Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It was so lovely to connect with you again after all these years. Thank you for inviting me.
Stay happy, keep gardening.
Bye for now.
You've been listening to Nicola Cairncross of nicolacairnext.com. Well, I hope you enjoyed the show today. We've got lots of resources on the website, so do come over to check them out. And by all means, feel free to book yourself into my diary at nicolacairnext.com/diary. I love to talk to entrepreneurs.